Hi everyone, welcome to this year's scoring analysis. For those of you who don't know, periodically I like to go in and analyze our scoring system to see if we need to tweak any of the numbers at all here or there. Essentially what I do is I will take the last 3 years, obviously in this case 2016, 17, and 18, I average all of those numbers out and then put all those numbers on a chart. From there we can see, are our quarterbacks overperforming, or do we need to increase running back production within our scoring system? And so again, since it's averaged out over 3 years, we can maybe normalize out any anomaly that may have happened one year or another within the NFL. And then also too, we can keep up with current trends within the NFL. Obviously, since 2005, when we started this league, the NFL has really made a lot of rules to make the passing game better. So over time, we've actually tweaked some of our running back scoring through this type of analysis to make running backs more productive and then obviously more competitive. So a little background. Way back in the day, and I kind of mentioned it back in 2005, we were a touchdown league. We just got points for touchdowns, and maybe we got a bonus point or two if you had 100-yard rushing or 300 yards passing. So I did a lot of research in the off-season that year to look for a really good scoring system. In the back of my mind, I knew I always wanted to expand to 16 teams as well. So it had to allow a 16-team dynasty league to have production way down at the bottom end of those roster slots. So during my research, I came across thehuddle.com. It's a fantasy site that is still alive today. And I came across this article by a guy named David Dorey, who is still kind of a big wig in the fantasy football industry. Anyway, he wrote this article about the principles of the perfect scoring system. The first principle, it should provide the best equivalency of positional value with respect to the actual values of positions in the NFL. In a traditional 12-person Yahoo league with a standard scoring system and one standard formation, you have to basically draft the number 1 or 2 or 3 running back no matter what. So in this case, we all know that the running game, especially in today's NFL, the running game is not near what it used to be. So if you were going to draft a fantasy team on your own, you are not going to draft a running back. You're going to go probably a quarterback, or you could argue offensive line or defensive line, something like that. Obviously then too, it should make the focus of the draft to always be on the best available player. Not necessarily the position. Again, in a standard league, you're basically a prisoner of the scoring system and the formation, more so of the formation. The third principle is that your scoring system should be rooted in reality. It should make sense that, like an actual team is playing, and that good performances by all team players are rewarded appropriately. That goes into those defenses. We always have this argument of our defenses scoring negative numbers. I can put up 50 points in the NFL, but if my defense gives up 53 points, I've lost the game. So I really like the fact that a poor defensive outing by your defense can hurt you on a Monday night. And then finally, it should respect how scoring occurs in the real NFL. No screwy categories by fumbles by punters or negative points for grand jury indictments by your NFL players, Michael Vick. We want it to be relatable. So after putting all of these numbers into a spreadsheet, I can create a graph like this, where obviously we can see this orange line are the quarterbacks, followed by the gray line, which is our running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and finally, way down at the bottom there, we have defenses. As we can see here, there's obviously we can see that the quarterbacks kind of rule our point production. And that's fine. They're the most important players in the NFL. And then we have a fairly nice dispersion coming down, through the 3 skill positions, where finally after about the 10th about the 10th position or so, wide receivers start to score more points, followed by running backs and then tight ends. Obviously then too, we can see the green, the very bottom line, that's the defenses. And we all know that Defenses score negative points, so they actually score the least amount of points. However, defenses are very valuable. Good defense is very valuable. So even though the point total may be the fewest of all, we all know that it's a valuable position. Which brings us to this principle of value-based drafting. The principle is the value of a player is determined not by the number of points he scores, but by how much he outscores his peers at a particular position. Let's take a look at an example. We all know that Kyle Orton is the greatest player of all time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean quarterback. He's a player with the ladies. He's a baller. He's basically like me. So if we look at this picture here, there's a lot going on in this picture. However, we don't have a whole lot of information. Kyle could have gone and he probably banged these two ladies in the club. He probably banged these ladies when they got back to his place. He probably banged these ladies in the morning, and now he's going back to sleep after he's cooked them breakfast, and he wants to get to sleep, and they take a picture with him. However, we don't really have anything to compare him to. In this case, we don't know if he's a high-value player. Maybe he just came home with these two ladies, fell asleep, and this picture was taken. So we don't really have anybody to compare him to. Or do we? If only there was somebody that, maybe an AFL owner, that had a similar situation like this. Oh, we do. Old School. There's Old School. So right away we can start to determine some value here. We can look at the band-aids on Old School's face. It doesn't look like he's having a good night. Obviously that woman right there on his shoulder is not near as high quality as the women with Kyle Orton. Now we can start to assess the value of Kyle Orton as a player compared to Old School, and comparatively, he is a much higher value player than Old School. So how do we determine who our Old School is? How do we determine that baseline player in which we compare all of the other players to? Basically, first we start by examining our weekly starting rosters. So we start one coach, one quarterback, one special team, one defense. That's pretty easy. We start one every week with all of those. Obviously then too, how do we make that comparison when we have multiple formations? In the AFL, unlike a lot of leagues, we have all these different formations that we can start every week. Basically, we start averaging. So now once we do that, we take all of the average starters. We go through, we have an average of one quarterback every week, an average of however many running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, etc. And then we multiply that by the number of teams. Obviously, we have 16 teams in the league. So that means that every week we have 16 quarterbacks. So that leads us to the question, do we compare all of the quarterbacks to that 16th quarterback? In my opinion, the answer is no. We have other starters that make for bye weeks. We have injuries. Players get injured. So basically, we can then multiply that by a coefficient, which will account for all of those extra players that may start. So in this case, these are the baseline. So we are going to compare all of our quarterbacks to that 24th quarterback. I believe the 24th quarterback last year was Kyle Fitzpatrick. We're going to compare all of our running backs to that 36th running back, which last year was Latavius Murray. So basically, Latavius Murray has zero value in our league. Every player in the league either has more value than Latavius Murray or less. So now, when we put all these numbers into the spreadsheet and rechart them, we come up with a graph that looks like this. Now we can see that there is an equivalency of positional value across almost all positions. Obviously, those number 1 through 3 running backs are a little more valuable than anybody else in the league. However, after about the 9th running back, running backs really start to drop off. We can see that quarterbacks and tight ends are up there. But after about the 5th or 6th, the tight ends start to drop off. And then finally, we can see after about the probably the 15th or 16th or so wide receiver, once we get to those wide receiver 2 positions, those are actually pretty valuable. And that just makes sense with how the NFL is structured, how the passing game really has taken over the game. So those high-end wide receiver 2s are really, really valuable as you go on through the positions. Obviously, then, too, we can see defenses are really, really valuable. The number 1 defense is equal in rank to, a top 10 any other skill position. So hopefully those defenses should be paid accordingly. Speaking of defenses, I've done some analysis on the defenses this year, and we are going to make some changes to the defensive scoring. So here is the new scoring for our defenses. As you can see, we've added a lot more tiers. If a defense gives up 220 points or less, they're going to get 10 points. And then we have tiers that basically go up by 19 yards every tier. What this does is on the right-hand side, we can see that in 2017, we had 305 positive games versus 202 negative scoring games for defenses. In 2018, there was an exact 50-50 split. I apologize that I don't have a 2016 stat in there. I started this test league in a new site, and basically I just didn't have access to run those numbers for 2016. Hopefully with this system in place, our defenses are going to have an equal chance of either scoring positive or negative points, which now will let us do the following. We're going to do some new roster rules for this year. So, for your defenses and special teams, you only need 1 of each, and you can have a maximum of 2. That means you only need 1 defense on your team. You still must have 2 coaches. We're going to say you can only have 22 total players. That includes coaches. And then this is the big news. And here's the big news. Defenses can be started on a bye. Starting defenses on a bye has been, it has not been ideal. So in this case, if you have the option, you can carry 2 defenses, you can carry 1 and just not even worry about it and start it on a bye, or you could always try to pick up one of the remaining defenses. Hopefully they have a good matchup, and maybe you can have a good game. So to me, it looks like our scoring system is right where it should be, especially when you start looking at that equivalence of value across positions. Obviously, and it's been like this for years now, but those wide receiver 2s on down are always going to have a little more value, and they should, especially in a deep 16-team dynasty league. So again, I hope you guys like the new roster rules, especially concerning defenses and starting defenses. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks a lot.